recording the 100th podcast episode with you. So I see there are a few people already in the live stream because I have my phone set up on the side because we know how much computers need power, and mine has been really weird. So I'm like, you know what? I am gonna stay with my computer focused on the live stream and have the other one run the live chat. So thank you so much, Zach, for joining, and also Conrad. Thank you for joining. I am so pumped to talk about what the journey has been, what you can learn from recording 100 episodes. Zach and I actually used to work together in a studio, so that was so cool. Thank you for being here. It's so different being the producer for hundreds and hundreds of hours and producing the 100th episode for other people. So when you're doing it for yourself, when it's your own show, when you're trying to like figure out who you want to be as a leader, those 100 episodes are so important, so key. So funny enough, it's not letting me see the comments on my live, so get out of here, sir. Come on. Well, I guess. I see already 4 people live on the chat. I have the chat on Riverside. That's where I'm recording and live streaming. So super pumped. I'm just going to see the comments here. Yes, 100 episodes. Emoji, emoji, emoji. So this podcast episode is going to be available on audio format. I will edit it out. That's one of the tips that I'm going to share with you. Anything that is live streamed, rarely people want to have the same kind of experience saying like, hi Zach, hi Conrad, hi whatever person, hey you there joining on the live stream. So I'm gonna curate hola Elizabeth, I'm gonna curate the episode in audio format so you have a very polished experience. So I had gathered for the past week or so a lot of comments about, questions that you have about how do you make it to 100 episodes? How do you actually market the podcast? What are the most effective ways? Where, if I was to invest money, where would I drop $1,000? That's what was one of the questions that I got. And I'm just going to be sharing some of the insights, but also I'm going to be making notes and telling you, hey, this is important. If you want to get to 100 episodes, this is something you need to consider. And I will say that having been a producer on live content, I cannot tell you, hi Simona, I cannot tell you how important it is to create a backlog of questions. I have you here. I'm going to prioritize live questions, but I got about, I think, 10 or 12 questions before even I went live so that you're not here on the guest spot or on the host spot and you're like, okay, what are we doing? Right? So it's not crickets. You're not stressed. You're like, okay, I have my safety comments here. If I want to go into them, I can. And so it's so bizarre to not be able to like hear you on the other side. But if you want to drop questions, I saw that Conrad is live. So I'll actually start by his question because I want to prioritize you who is here and show you some love. Thank you for showing up. I'm so honored that you took some time to show up on this live stream. So um, I'm going to be getting Conrad's question, which was, have you ever scrapped an entire episode after editing it? And why? If so, do you think you'll ever revisit or repurpose the content elsewhere? Cool. Excellent question. So I always am of the opinion that if a content piece, whether that's a video, that's a podcast, whatever piece of content that you're releasing, that is a representation of the quality of your work and the expertise that you have. And so if you're not very happy about what that piece of content looks like a podcast episode, you should always consider, how will this impact my brand? And it's not to be perfectionist or anything like that, but I've done podcast episodes where I recorded them and it was the end of the day, which is another tip. Do not record when you feel like you're really tired. You're going to mess up so much. So that episode was ending up so choppy and it was just so obvious that I was making cuts, especially as I'm doing the podcast video first, that I was like, wow, like I definitely want to record again. So I did record it on the following day. I did have a podcast interview that I did not really like, not on the guest. The guest was amazing. I didn't feel like I did my best work. So I'm actually re-releasing, no, I'm actually releasing it next week. and I'm going to be editing a lot of what I said. So it really depends. If it's something that the guest said something they were like, there's no way I can include this without the episode sounding weird. There's always like tricks that you can say, like go in post production and record a little bit of a segment, say, hey, something happened here, but this is what the next question I ask the so and so person. So keep commenting on those. I'll definitely see that some of the people in the chat are actually experts. So I would love to hear from you in the comments if you've recorded a podcast episode for a client, or if you've gotten all the way to 100 episodes. What have you done? How have you celebrated? Because I want to share a few ideas at the end of the episode that you can do. But if you're in the chat, let's go. Let's do it. Um, so kind of a few interesting things that as a leader, this podcast was my first ever podcast. I've done podcasts about arts and culture, music, um, co-hosted a show that was kind of like testing, which Zach was actually a co-host of. There's so many different things that can happen that you don't expect as a thought leader, and you're building your expertise. My podcast was something that I wanted to create to build my confidence, to talk long term, to build my confidence speaking in English about podcasting. And so I'm so glad. A lot of people were asking me, like, what was the main thing that you've learned, the biggest transformation? And for me, it is to be able to do this live stream right now, even though I prepared and did all the things. But I feel that too many of us are too afraid of like failing in public. And I will give you a big tip. Whether you're starting a new podcast that is all about your expertise, or you feel like it's not clicking, or there's like a lot of friction in the process, I'm going to ask you, are you as natural as yourself? And again, I'm going to go there, as authentic as you can be. The number one decision that I made from starting the show was, one, I'm not going to have a complicated setup. I want it to be set up and go. And the second thing was, I'm not creating a persona, because when you are creating content, it is so infinitely harder to build a persona. The easier it flows into your natural personality, the better. And I've met people all over the world and in different conferences, and they were like, oh, wow, like you sound the same in person as you do in your podcast. I'm like, I should take this as a compliment, but kind of saddens me, because the experience is, and I am, again, I've coached clients for the past like 10 years. So I know when people are trying to put on a show, are trying to pretend that they're someone else, that they're more confident than they are, or whatever it is. I really want to invite you to think about, how can I make everything easier for me? Because somebody asked me about burnout, and burnout and imposter syndrome go hand in hand. And so I want you to think about, there's so many things that we're trying to do as hosts, right? As the person running all the things, or running most of the project. And so having to build up someone that you think needs to be a public person, more confident, more chatty, more whatever, it creates this disconnection when the listeners meet you in person, or even for yourself, you start lacking that like humph, because you're like, I feel like I'm a fraud. And I released a podcast episode talking about how I really don't like the expression fake it until you make it. I'm going to be dropping so many episodes on this. But the reason is because I feel that the fake it until you make it removes the value in going through the journey of learning. I think it's like, do it until you make it, right? And so consistently putting in the work and learning as a person who is learning how to contact with a camera, how to fake engagement in the sense of like building momentum and getting yourself excited when maybe you don't have engagement right away. So that's something that is very important, that you stay true to yourself. And then number three is that you're in it for the long run. I was really surprised to kind of like, in my head, I knew that it was going to take time to get some results. Some I got them fairly quickly, but others I was like, wow, like getting really comfortable in front of the mic. I look back at my first 10 episodes and like cringing. And it's great, right? Like it's great that I went from, wow, I didn't host a podcast as like, by myself or whatever for 10 years, when it's like my expertise and stuff. It was more creative. And it took me a while to get comfortable. So I want to go back into the questions that we're having live. Simona is asking, what do you do when you feel like you run out of podcast episode ideas? I haven't been as consistent because I'm out of ideas. Simona, no, I don't believe you. I Here's the solution. I find that taking a step back and looking through basically the opposite of what I've done. So if I've talked about 10 things that you should be doing in social media, well, then do 10 things you should avoid. So go back to those episodes that perform really well, look through your analytics and realize, like, okay, like I may have not mentioned this thing in a previous episode. You can do a continuation, like an update of an episode that you covered. And then you're like, oh, wow, like I really didn't realize this other element was a thing, right? Or maybe the market shifts and you want to do an update. I find that every conversation that I have with a fellow peer, with listeners of the show on Instagram, anything is a trigger for me to create content. So, someone that I follow for many years is Denise Duffel Thomas. She has a podcast called Chill and Prosper. And I follow her podcast because she is so different than what most podcasters are. She's a millionaire. She has a show that is very chill, that is like completely unpretentious. And because our styles are very similar in a way, I find that like, oh, let me do what this type of episode is. And sometimes it's going back to conversations with listeners that you had on social media, comments they left, replies. I get a lot of ideas from replies to newsletters that I sent, listeners checking in. Sometimes I do a follow up of a previous episode that I've done with a guest, that if I have the expertise to break it down, I will do it. And so it helps me to connect listeners to that topic, but also to a previous episode they may not have checked before. I think that the sky is the limit. And again, like you can look at my content, like peers or competitors, and you go, okay, like I really like this. Let me see what I can do, my take on this one topic. So there's so many ways. I think the idea is maybe what else is happening in your life. And that was one of the questions that I got. It was like the burnout. Sometimes we feel creative burnout where we run out of ideas, and it's because we're getting too much in our head about what is air quotes content. And so I want you to think about what is that one thing that like that 5 minute episode. Like I had podcast episodes that were so short and I'm like, mm, it's not going to be the most air quotes valuable of the episodes. But then I got so much feedback. People were like, oh my gosh, because maybe it was more inspirational. So look through your content pillars and see which ones are the topics that you can connect to those content pillars easier and go with the flow. Creator burnout is having that expectation that you always have to perform at the same level. When I'm like, okay, you know what? I moved homes, I moved states, I had construction in my house for like more than 3 months. That is incredibly disruptive. So I was like, I'm going to allow myself to not create a podcast episode that is not like the slickest, or I may not be feeling like my most excited, but like, what is consistency going to look like in a period of time that is more disruptive, right? And so I want you to really think through what are the ways that you are self-limiting without realizing, because anything can be a podcast idea, like a conversation with someone else, like you're in the supermarket, and that can be a metaphor for a podcast episode. So that was one of the questions that Erica Johnson had on LinkedIn. She said, what an incredible accomplishment. Curious to hear how you're my goodness, how you answer on working around burnout. And so I don't think that burnout, there's multiple types of burnout. I've owned my burnout and I've talked to you and been open about it all the time, where I say, hey, this episode is going to come out later because I had to prioritize client work and I felt like I was so tired by that point. Is just having that communication consistently. You're going to fail, you're going to mess up. It's fine. It's always going to happen. And so, it's going to be always happening like this, where you're thinking, okay, it may not be the best, but it is what it is, right? Next episode, I will be so much better. But if it meets the criteria of the bare minimum, where you're like, there's value here. Is it worth it? Like, I am ruthless with my editing. If I find that I was tired and I'm like, I'm not too sure, I've I've done episodes that were the raw file was 22 minutes and I shrank it down to like 15 or 12. And I'm like, these 12 minutes are really good. I know that the listeners will take value. So really think through like what is your point? What is the purpose with that episode? And another way to work through burnout is do the seasons. I genuinely think that as a creator, if you're doing episodic content where you're the main host or the main host and one man band or one woman band, right? Like one person band where you're doing all the things, you're going to find yourself um, basically struggling creatively, struggling with the burnout. And it's just like, okay, it's going to happen. But the depth at which you will go is limited when you decide to own it and say, I'm not going to pretend that everything is going the same way. I'm going to figure out how can I still be a little creative. And that falls into something else. Also, hello, Nick. Good to see you. It falls into this another category, which is not expecting to create the content that someone with a team of four, with someone who has maybe 10 years of experience, or someone who is just naturally gifted at that, and expect for us to perform always at that level. When I launched the podcast, I was like, tech setup is not going to be, super complex. I'm going to allow myself to mess up, but I'm going to do it and continue doing video and challenge myself. And I just knew some elements were going to be easier than others, but it's like, okay, the goal is that I'm going to perhaps suffer for a few months of the year as I'm going through it. And then I'm going to see the end of the tunnel. And every single time you're releasing an episode that you're like, yeah, it may not be as amazing, people will be connecting to random parts of it. So I want to hammer down that idea that just because you don't think it's the best piece of content or your best, it doesn't mean that it won't be a great piece of content for someone else. So feel free to carry on dropping some comments. I see that there's some a little bit of delay, but I'm gonna hop on another question as you're writing. So Ali said, "Love it. What is something that you wish you had done differently from the beginning?" I wish I gave myself more compassion because I know that this is hard. But again, we kind of like if as we are high achievers, we go, ah, I worked in radio for a few years. Of course, I can do this. And then, oh, of course, I live stream for clients. Oh, of course, I do strategy for clients. Oh, of course, I've edited clients' work. But when you're the person doing all of it and you're thinking, wow, like all of these skill sets that are new to me, plus the pressure to perform as a leader, like all of that is a lot of pressure. So I wish I had more fun from the beginning. And I was like, okay, we're going to experiment. I wish I moved faster in terms of finding joy in some elements, because that definitely was something that got me stuck a lot. I did find that I had also, we have Jasenia Bocanegra in the chat. Hello, friend. She already crossed 100 podcast episodes on her podcast, so I'm super excited that she's here. She definitely should drop some things on the chat because I want to know what you've done with clients. How have you celebrated your 100th podcast episodes? I want people to have that inspiration on the chat as well and some ideas for them to do. So that was what Ali said. What is something that you wish you had done differently from the beginning? I find that I wish I had more implemented more joy and less expectation to perform as a leader. Because when you're having fun, it really shows. And I'm not saying that I didn't have fun, but I'm on the third season, and so I think that a lot of times we just get going, and so asking yourself like I recorded with a friend of mine, Rochelle Hariri, on the She's Interesting podcast. She's like, I'm feeling blocked. And I was like, how about we record something fun? Like the two of us is more conversational. And we did it in the car. And it was so fun to realize that, yeah, we have so many interesting things to say. But I find that sometimes we get so hung up on following best practices. And I think that that's something I'm going to be talking about later on the episode because following the actually let's talk about it right now. Following best practices, you don't realize how much it can drain you if you're doing all of them. I realized that I lost the joy in podcasting because it wasn't no longer doing the episode and getting excited about it is like, okay, doing the episode, but I have to think through the hook in order for it to be like optimized, right? Creating the flow, editing it well, creating three thumbnails on YouTube. So YouTube can test it, push it further, and help me reach more people. Having different descriptions, having the chapters. Like I love that AI helps me with so many things. In the beginning, I really struggle with show notes, and so having all of these things that I feel I'm not so good at, I recommend you assess what is holding you back, what is taking the joy out of the thing that you're doing, the podcast. Is it because you find that you're spending too much time creating assets? Hire a VA or use tools like Riverside's magic clips that it the AI will select some and you tweak. But don't feel like you have to do all of it, or hire an editor to do those for you, or hire a strategist to help you come up with like the most bomb like season ever that is amazing, hits your goals. And so if you haven't set up some goals, I feel like a lot of people don't understand what success looks like because they never set up the end goal, right? Like the finish line. And the finish line can be moved. But I feel like a lot of people are like, yeah, well, I just want to figure it out. But then it's 6 months in, 8 months in, 2 years in, and they still like, I gotta have fun, but like they don't know why they're doing it. And so if you set up measurable and specific outcomes, you're going to be able to say, okay, yes, I've done this, and this, and it yielded these results, or maybe it didn't yield results, and you need to reassess what you're doing. So I think that that's super important. So let's move into the next question that I got. Um, Jared Reed said, "Congrats, 100 episodes in. What's the biggest thing you've learned on this journey?" It's kind of like the same. And really, I would say that the biggest thing that I've learned is that you have to lean into what is working already, which is something that I work with clients. We figure out like what is working already, so you don't feel like you're literally trying to catch everybody. And one question that I got later was that I'm going to answer is the how to effectively market the podcast to grow. And I find that Instagram, for instance, has been my ride or die. And even though we're all complaining about the algorithms, we're talking about the reach that is not the same like in 2020. And I will say it's 100 episodes in. I've promoted a lot of podcast episodes. I show up every single week, and when I look at my analytics, my account is still growing. So lean into what is working already. I get so many new listeners from finding me on Instagram, from finding me through Google. So look at what is already working and double down, so you don't feel like you're basically spinning your wheels. There you go. So, Conrad, you do comment a very good point. I find that generative AI is good for structural tasks for prep, but not for ideation. More human creativity, critical thought, please. I will actually say that it's kind of dependent on the quality of the prompt, though, and in the sense that the more context you give it, the better it will give you the outcome, right? And funny enough, a client of mine a couple of weeks ago, she was playing around with ChatGPT, and she said, she's like, oh, here's all the episodes ideas that ChatGPT gave me, but her prompt was very, very like generic. She gave it like a little bit of context. And I looked through those ideas and I was like, we already covered these. We covered this last year. And that was no AI at the time. Like we were literally like basically doing that. So I was like, great, because it's almost like what I came up with. But I was like, okay, we need to see the gaps in our content. And so I was like, okay, this, and this we haven't covered. That's going to be timely. I know that there's things that people are searching for. And so when you're thinking about AI, use it as a tool, as an assistant, to your point, right? Like, but I think that even for ideas is really good, because sometimes we're missing like the kind of like the missing opportunities that our listeners are thinking about. Like they know what they don't know what they don't know, and you know what they don't know, but at the same time you sometimes forget that they don't know some stuff. And so AI can actually help you refresh what you think you know about your listeners. So something that I would advise everybody is to look through ChatGPT and kind of like figure out other ideas, other angles. So Justin is asking, after 100 episodes, what is an unexpected win that has brought you the most joy from podcasting? Okay, this is by far the most random story that you will probably hear. Again, maybe not. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. But here's the thing. In I launched the podcast space, which I should have done like a little like, oh, if you're new here, I'm an Xavier, I'm a podcast strategist, da 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 da. But I launched my podcast in 2023, 3 years after I launched my company, because I didn't want the overwhelm. I was like, I'm happy at the time. I was editing client work. I had a production agency, and so I was like, I don't want that for me. But then once I moved away from production, started focusing on strategy and on content repurposing and coaching, I realized now is the time for me to start, right? And so one of the best things that happened in 2023 was I launched my podcast in January 30th of 2023, and then the podcast show in London happened in May, late May. So it wouldn't have even been like 6 months in. And so I received a message in the morning of a friend of mine, Lloyd George, who I had on the show maybe episode 1 and 2, or no, episode 2 and 3, I think. And so he was talking about brand deals and how to create content for brands and stuff. And I thought it was so cool because he was like, "You're not going to believe what happened." I went to London. And so someone came up to me. And by the way, for context, if you don't know Lloyd George, he has honestly maybe 3 to 5 times a bigger audience than I do. He has done stuff for Spotify, for Riverside. He's done a lot of really cool things for brands. And this person stops him. Of course, you now already know what's going to happen, but this person stops him and he's like, "You're familiar." And he's like, "I have my own podcast, da da da." And she's like, "No, you were a guest on someone's podcast." And so he's like, "Okay, open up the app and let's see which podcast you're consuming. And I'll tell you, like, yep, I've been a guest on this or not." And then my show pops up and she's like, "Okay, these are the shows." And he's like, "Oh, I've been, on Anna's show." So here I am in the US. I haven't lived in the UK for many, many years. And so my listener Sophie, like, she was telling Lloyd, like, she recognizing him in a conference thousands of miles away from where I am, because she listened to my show, my interview with Lloyd. And like, how amazing is it that, and I will say, I have my podcast is under 600 downloads per month on audio only. And then, a few more, maybe 300 more, 400 more on YouTube. And so a small show can have such a huge impact. And you're looking at like, 600 downloads, maybe that's like 300 people listening, 100 people listening. Like, how cool is it that one small show connected two people and that they stayed in touch and all? And I'm like, this is crazy. So don't think that just because your downloads are low, that you can't make transformation for other people and that you're not doing anything, air quotes, good in the world. So I think that it was such an aha moment for me that I love how random it was. So, moving on to the next thing, Angela Hollowell asked, "What's the best thing that's come from starting a podcast?" I guess like that's the same as Yesenia. She asked me 3 questions. So the next was, "What's the most unexpected thing that came from starting a podcast?" For me, it was honestly, for me personally, was realizing how many people would know about my brand without even I know about them. So I get consistent emails on LinkedIn and stuff, messages from people on Instagram saying, like, "I really love this episode." And I have no idea who they are, right? And again, you don't need thousands of downloads per month to start having that engagement, but it needs to start with you. And that's something that I will advise you. If you don't have a relationship um, tool like WhatsApp to send your listeners to engage there, or like any social media really, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever, where people can DM you, you're missing out, because you're missing out on opportunities. And yes, Spotify has like the comment section, but like it's not the same thing. I don't think, it's not the same as people feeling like they know. And this is the tip: send them into one place. I always say, have my goodness, if you have questions, send me a message on Instagram, and it's always the same place. They know if they want to engage with me, where I have the most fun is Instagram. And so think through, how are you building that relationship? And something that I do a lot and that not enough people do is I book calls with listeners, especially people who engage with me a lot on Instagram. I want to take them from listeners to like super fans. And so they get to meet me. I get to hear from their mouth, like, what are the struggles that they're having, how they see, like, I sometimes do some customer kind of research, and I'm like, hey, what are 3 words that you associate with my brand? And I add those to my list because it's so helpful that you get the exact words, because you may realize that, like, yep, my branding is on point, or there's like one key term that you never use in your marketing, and that like can really help you. So just think about that. Like, one, you get to meet the people who are listening to you, and you're like, wow, like the outcomes of what I'm sharing, like the joy that I feel after meeting people who are like, this episode really helped me, or like you made me think differently about all the different things. And also, one other thing that I would say that has been so cool is connecting to folks, peers, and connecting to amazing people. So Samantha is in the chat. We've met each other through a podcast client. We actually met each other at Amy Porterfield's course, and so we stay connected. We work together, and so it was so cool to be able, like, the podcasting world to touch you in so many different ways, to get to meet people, and just take you unexpected places that sometimes social media can't. So now this is the thing. Angela asked me, if you had $1,000 to invest in your show, how would you spend it? And I'm very curious to hear for the podcast experts in the chat, how would you spend your $1,000 if you wanted to grow your podcast? While you're typing away, I'm gonna say that I had to take notes because I was like, okay, where would I spend them? I would probably put them in podcast ads, for either shows or podcast platforms where it's like minimal disruption. So you click on, like the app, and it takes you to the show while you're listening to another podcast. You can add the podcast, all those things. I would actually do something that is minimal friction. Newsletter ads or podcast guesting. Some podcasts will charge you for guesting, and there's so many people who are like, yucky, like I would never pay $100, $200, $300 for a podcast. And for some people, they have an expense, and that is a way to weed out people who are not aligned, people who just want to go on the show to kind of like use it as, you know mm, an ad, a huge ad. And so I want you to think about, if you were to be told, okay, you can pay to have a slot on a big podcast that has like 3, 5 times your audience, like, wouldn't you pay and then get all of those listeners into your show? Because I guested on a podcast, actually, that Samantha introduced me to. So, oh gosh, I can't recall the lady's name now. It's all about networking. I think it's like Brave Women something something. Samantha, help me right now. So this lady only interviews people by referral, and so she and I had like a great connection. And after the interview, that was free, she did say, like, my audience is very engaged, la la la, don't be surprised if after the episode people reach out to you. I'm like, okay, great. When my episode aired, within that morning I had 3 DMs in on my Instagram, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, and that was so good. Like, I didn't think of podcasting that way. I never thought about guesting as a strategy for podcast growth, or I never thought about like just using the podcast to sell to my audience. Like, I never thought about that. Like, I just thought like you had a sponsor." And I was like, wow, like this audience is really engaging, it's really worth it. So think about if you were to do that on a show that once you pay, it's going to give you, maybe 1,000. Oh, Powerful Women Rising, that's the name of the podcast. And we recorded on Zoom, nothing fancy, but it was such a great show. And again, it has such an invested audience. So you truly never know what's going to happen when you're guesting on someone's podcast that is super aligned. Because again, I serve women who are impact driven leaders. And so that audience was perfect. And that's why they resonated. So I invite you to think about, if you're not thinking about investing, if someone can give you the clout or give you the audience that you're trying to look, it's a no brainer. So, a little bit of a water break right now. So, I'm talking a lot. So, this is going to be helpful. I know if Nick Redmond's still on the episode, she's going to be like, drink away, friend. Keep those vocal folds hydrated. All right. So, let's move into another question, this time by the Miller Social. That's amazing. Congrats. I'm getting close to 100 episodes too. I would love to hear about strategies that worked for growth. I'm always fascinated by that part. So that, and then I'm gonna bundle up the question that I had from our Planned Stories podcast, which I think she's based in the UK. Hopefully, we meet in the podcast show. She said, "Fantastic, congratulations! I would love to hear your thoughts on marketing and how you find your audience and spread the word." So these two questions, answering them right now. So growth strategies again, pay for ads, totally a strategic move. I would say consistent growth will be relied upon you having fun, but seeing what's working. So look at those analytics, figure out when you're the most creative self, because when we are excited to share something, when we are excited about specific episodes, we promote them a lot more. And that shows in the downloads. Like, for instance, last week's episode was with Justin Moore. One, he was a guest. I tapped into his audience. So if you're doing a solo show and you never have guests, you can't use this, but I will say whenever I have guests, they always have shared. And so I see growth, tap into a new audience. In fact, last week, I think I had like 97 unique listeners. So they're very likely to be Justin's audience, finding my show, binging my show, which is win-win, and $0 about that. So think about that, right? Like tapping into basically that moment where you're like, okay, what made me excited? Was it because instead of sharing a reel, I created a carousel post, or I did more a talking head video where I did talk to the camera and did like a breakdown of what I learned on the episode? I find that if you're looking at a one social media channel or one, like, let's say, email list, double down on what's working and keep at it. Even though some weeks you get crickets, some weeks people get super excited and talk to you all the time. It just truly spend 10% innovating. So 90% of your time doing the same things that you're doing, but experiment a little. Like don't go out crazy and don't like just try every single week you're going to try something new, because it's not going to work. But really think about the 10%. It's doable. You can experiment. You may be surprised about something that works. Like, for instance, I started experimenting with threads um halfway through this season, and I was like, let's see what happens. And it brought me new listeners because I could track, and people were like, oh yeah, I'm listening to the episode, it was so good, right? So I would never go back to Twitter, but I will definitely try threads because it's like low pressure, it's not being camera ready, all those things. Now, another thing that I would say, pair best practices with having those experiments, but tell your listeners you're experimenting, because oh my goodness, ooh, allergies. Because sometimes people just like don't realize that you're experimenting, and they're like, they're all over the place, or like, I don't know what's that about. But tell them, communicate, like, I'm playing with something. Like, do you like this format? Don't you like it? Like, if you don't like it, why? Again, be so transparent that they don't have any reason other than just engage with it, and let you know their thoughts. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody wants to let you know. So ask, and hop on those DMs as well. So another one would be to scale. When you're thinking about scaling, I personally, through these 100 episodes. Also, hello, Matt. Matt, Zach, and I were like the three musketeers working together. It's so awesome that you are here. Um, I definitely think that to scale a podcast, you don't necessarily have an unfair. Okay, let me restate this in a different way. If you want to scale your growth, you can't do exactly what you're doing right now. I've been looking at what other people are doing, and in order to explode your downloads, you really need to invest in ads. Whether that's growing your newsletter, that then eventually your podcast gets promoted on the newsletter, ads on social media to grow the reach of your podcast, ads on different platforms, like, for instance, like being added to a list of the top 10 best podcasts for whatever. Like, you really need to spend some money in order to get all of that growth. If you're not going to spend money, here's a few things that I found that are true. So when you see big results, people normally come with a pre-built audience. So I hear a lot of podcasters feel real frustrated. They're like, I'm already at episode 75, and then this other person who's a competitor They launched, and within like 2 months they had like more downloads in those 2 months than I've had in the past, like God knows how many years, right? And so that comes with, if you have a pre-built audience, and I work with a client on this, and she had over 100,000 followers on Instagram and over 10,000 followers, sorry, subscribers on her newsletter. And when we met, I said, hey, I know that you have 100,000 followers on your Instagram, but just don't expect that everybody who follows you there will turn into a listener, because that's not true. I know that for those listening in, you're like, what? There's still people on the podcast industry that don't um, listen to podcasts? You would be shocked. Actually, in fact, last month, I was speaking at a women in tech event here in Arkansas, and we had about like 300 people in the audience. And before I started my presentation, I asked, hey, who here is a podcast? Y'all, one person raised her arm. And so I was like, oh my God, interesting. And so when I said, hey, who here is about to start a podcast, or is it like in the launch phase? A few more arms raised. And then I was like, all right, I guess who here thinks that maybe a podcast isn't for them and just hoping that by the end of this presentation, they know it's the right thing to go for? More arms raised. So there's so much untapped market for people who don't even listen to a podcast yet, who don't consider themselves people who would. I'm sorry, the air is getting dry. So I should have muted my microphone. Sorry about that, y'all. So always think about, when you are creating content, there's some potential that you may be looking at what you do and looking at someone else, and you don't know that maybe they paid, over $5,000 or $10,000 for a strategy that has like a lot of elements, or maybe they hire someone for some specific things to get them the results. Or there's someone who has so many years of experience that they basically get to the results faster because they maybe have accumulated all of this knowledge around like offline marketing, or digital marketing, or just a lot of knowledge that you don't have. So when you're thinking about like the most effective ways to grow, don't assume that what you're doing is wrong and that everyone else has it figured out. They just figured out a strategy that already works with their strengths. But I will say that aligned podcast guesting and shows that are very, very similar to yours, podcast swaps, or podcast promos, if you don't want to commit to doing a podcast swap, especially if you already have your content mapped up, ask the host to record a promo, right? 30 seconds, and or maybe like 4 or 5 minutes of that podcast episode where like listeners have a little bit of a taste of that episode, and then they can go and check it out. So this is something super strategic that you can try without spending money. And one thing that I want to say is, when you're thinking about using the podcast to grow your business, you're going to be inclined and you're going to be advised to create episodes like client case studies, testimonials, live coaching calls. But these, when you look at the numbers, they're going to have lower numbers. But these podcast episodes will convert listeners into buyers. Why? Because it's talking about the experience of the person that has worked with you, like the results you gave them. What was the experience like? Again, people have these like very big fear, and real, right? Like there's a lot of liars on the internet. So people have like this struggle to buy. But when they hear those like testimonials or that experience, they're like, oh wow, like that is me too, and really helps them break down that expectation that like, oh, this person will never work with me. One of my listeners said like, I want to work with you, but I think that like I'm not there yet where I need to be in order to work with you in terms of downloads. And I'm like, how many downloads do you think that my clients have? And she said, oh, maybe 1,000 a month. I'm like, some of my clients only have like 30 downloads per month, because the goal of the podcast is not to get downloads, is to get them to the decision makers. So people have really different expectations, or they literally get to do everything they need with those 30 people. Like it's fine. So I want you to think about, when you're thinking about growing, if you're using your podcast as a tool for business, those lower download numbers will be amazing to convert new listeners, to convert listeners into buyers, because there's a lot of people who will come to you for different reasons. Some they just like they're looking for free information. Others are not ready to work from you at all, with you at all. So what that means is you really need to think about what is the purpose of those podcast episodes, and again, doesn't matter that is a lower number. Is it doing something for your business? So I'm very curious, for those in the chat. Drop me some questions. What are some things that if you've tried doing in podcasting, what worked, what didn't? Oh my goodness, I've already been talking for 44 minutes. This is insane. Um, so while you're putting those comments over there, I want to go back into the questions, but before that, because I only have I think I just have one more. Yeah, just one more. I want to say something. I want to thank you. I want to thank you, whether you're a peer, whether you're a listener, whether we work together, where you follow me on social media. Thank you. You cannot I cannot understate the powerful connections that podcasting has enabled me to get. And so, if it wasn't for you sending me a message, like a really nice message at the moment that I was like really needing it, kind of like maybe like, is anyone listening? Is this really impacting people? And you sending that message at that very moment really gave me the boost to continue, or maybe help me create a podcast episode that it was just maybe not what you needed, but maybe what someone else's needed at after listening to that message, because I was like, wow, like I had a parallel idea. And so really thinking through the role that you play as a listener, as someone who engages in other people's content, like it's so powerful. So make sure that you tell your favorite podcaster more frequently. Like if you listen to the podcast, like what did you enjoy? Like tell them that you really appreciate them. Tell them what you're doing throughout the day when you're listening to their podcast. Give them more information about who you are as a listener. And so I really want you to think about yourself as someone who is helping the hosts create this beautiful product that is podcasting. And the podcast itself and the podcast industry has enabled me to connect to so many amazing peers, and it's been great. Like my primary audience are podcasters. The secondary audience that I serve as clients are actually peers. Sometimes they hire me to consult with them to help them grow not only their podcast but maybe their visibility through podcasting, and all of that has been possible through my thought leadership. And so using these podcasts, using my expertise has, I know that it has helped you a lot, but you have helped me a lot to stay connected, to stay engaged, to stay in the mission. So thank you from the depths of my heart. I really mean it. Um, and those encouraging messages are truly important in a time when we're spending so much time on social media. Maybe we're blinded by all the results that everybody else is getting but us. So keep sending messages. So I'm about to wrap up, but I want to talk about the thing that I I would say is super important when you're considering. Oh, Sean, he just joined. Thank you for joining. You're one of the people that I'm so glad that my podcast has connected me deeper to, and social media has connected to me, because he's wonderful. Go and follow Sean. Sean, drop your socials on the chat, please. So I want to tell you about, if you have a podcast episode and if you're trying to get to 100 podcast episode, like what are some ideas that you can play around with? So I actually asked the audience what would be something that they have done to celebrate 100 episode, or something that they would recommend. And so Elaine Johnson from the Reckless Media production agency, she said that to celebrate episode 100, they had a game night with their friends slash previous guests on the show. They had a cookie cake with the initials of their show, a number 100. That is the cutest thing. I love that for you. This is adorable. And then Stacy Sims says, for my 100th episode, I asked another person in the space, which is a news anchor, to interview me. You could also do a live AMA, Ask Me Anything for your listeners. I'm 10 years in. My show is Diabetes Connections, focusing on type 1. So those are amazing connections, amazing ideas. Let me suggest a few more. So I have again this live Q&A beefed up with Ask Me Anything. You can pre-record it and not have to worry about like live engagement at all. Best of episodes. Those are so good. You can start planning ahead at least a month in advance, and start like gathering some highlights. I would say you can even do better, and every single time you're editing an episode and you're like, oh wow, this section is really amazing, go clip that section and put it in a folder. And so when you're doing like the best of, or like summer of inspiration or whatever, past you already did you a favor. So super smart to do it like that. And then interview with your editors slash producers. I have done some of these. They were so fun to do. I cannot tell you enough, because a lot of people do not know how you are with like behind the mic or in a more relaxed setting. So it will definitely help you with showing a different side of you. And again, you don't have to do it alone. You also can do a live episode recording with a ticketed audience, so you charge for seats. That's something that I've seen a lot of people do, and they're not necessarily like huge shows. They just have a very engaged audience, or they're like podcast. They're the podcast itself is like a thought leadership show, and so it's almost like a training session. So people, when they sign up, they're like, oh, it's like going to a live masterclass. I see the comments are popping. I'll be there in a second. And then last recommendation is doing a Zoom party. There was a client of mine who basically, she's like, I don't want to do live stream. I don't want, like, this was like 2022. So, Riverside was not mainstream necessarily for a lot of folks. So she did a Zoom party, and she was like, oh my gosh, we had so much fun. It was the best. I couldn't attend. But like, she was like, it was great because some people came. It wasn't a lot of people. So we got to chat. I got to meet people. I'm like, how cool is that we can get to do that? So, um, some comments. Let me see. So I have, oh, I see a few comments saying you're too kind. Oh, Zach said, if you don't like being moved emotionally, then avoid Sean's podcast at all costs. That is true. Sean's podcast is something shifted, and it's definitely um, very powerful storytelling. So get inspired by listening to Sean's podcast. And then I just see the my. I think I know who you are. I can't recall your first name. Oh my goodness, this is so embarrassing. But yes, you're saying I had someone come on my show to interview me and do a reflection of the first 100th episode. Hmm, interesting. Again, you can have so many people join you on the show, listeners, a peer, a friend, someone that you find really comfortable to be around, and that can make it really a fun and exciting experience. So I did not celebrate my 200th or 300th episode, which was sad for me. I mean, is your podcast on hold? That's the thing. Like sometimes you drop it on hold and you do it again, or if you're not celebrating the 200 or 300, it's because sometimes the podcast, like, you have something scheduled, like, it's fine. Honestly, it's your show, do the heck whatever you want. If you want to create my ed tech live podcast, there you go, because I can't see here on Riverside. That's who's saying about the I did not celebrate my 200th or 300th episode. I think that there's definitely a lot of creative outlets. Again, something talking about creative outlets, your podcast can be a tool that helps you through a specific time in your life, and then you let go, right? Like, we have to be so stuck to like, oh, this is my project, I have to continue it. I had a podcast about music, and the sole purpose of that podcast was I moved to the US and I couldn't work, and so I wanted to start building some connections. I wanted to start building some sort of like portfolio that showed some work while I was waiting to get my work authorization. And so I started that podcast simply to have something to talk about, something to get involved, to keep my mind sharp. And so you can do that. You can also use your podcast as a creative outlet. If something around your work does not allow you to be creative, that can be the outlet that you use to remain involved in that thing they're really passionate about, to meet the people who do the thing that you want to do the thing, and maybe geographically they're not there, but you can connect to them online. And then Jasenia saying my 100th podcast episode was the same week as my 10th year in business. So I mixed it with reflecting back on years 1, 5, and 10. That is so cool, especially if you're using your podcast as a business tool. That is so clever because you're showing also like progression and depth. And so I really think that that's an awesome idea. So, guys, we're getting, I don't know if I want to do 1 hour, but this is y'all, not guys, because that's too specific. But I want you to ask me like what is one, like one quick thing that you want to tell me if you're like listening to the show, or if you listen to one episode that you really stuck with, that was like changing your perception of podcasting or whatever it is. Like I would love to just hear if there was like one specific episode that you liked, because I promise you they all probably be surprised by your answers. I always get surprised because in my head I'm like, oh, there's these three things that I talked on the podcast that are so strategic, and people always come back with like other things that in my mind were so under my radar. But I'm like, oh yeah, like that was really good. I just like didn't see that coming. So if you don't mind sharing that on the comments, this is such a great episode. And well, thank you, Jasenia. I had so much fun recording the episode with you. Every single time we record, it's always, we had a great time. We talk about our expertise, we break it down. It's been so great to know you. And actually, fun fact was, Jasenia, I met before I even had the podcast. It was on social media and I had the newsletter. So that's something that I will say before closing: diversify your marketing channels for podcasting. Make sure that when you're creating content, you're not fueling it all in to one media company or to one specific company. Because for instance, example, like when Meta went down, people couldn't use Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. And so if you have like a podcast account on Instagram or Facebook, and then you have a WhatsApp chat to talk to your listeners to promote the podcast, if something happens to Facebook, if goes bust or whatever, or Meta, should I say, like you're gonna have such a big dip in community. You're gonna really struggle to build your audience again. So diversify it in two formats. One is immediate, right? So I wanted to talk about the actions, the tasks that you have every single week that are specific to one, active and passive marketing. So basically active is like social media, posting clips from the episode or sending newsletters out to promote the podcast. And then the passive, of course, is SEO, YouTube. Make sure that you have those like two. And then an immediate and long-term impact, that you're doing things like social media is immediate, but SEO is long-term, right? And I find that my SEO has really helped me. Like I've done such a good job at SEO that I have, without having to promote old episodes, I have consistently 20 to 30 to 40%, depending on the months, of traffic coming to episodes that I released in every different year. So 2023, 2024, 2025. And all of this is because the SEO is working for me, because YouTube is working for me. And so I can continue promoting that week's podcast without having to promote, my 100, my 99 episodes. So I I love that y'all are like sharing in the comments. Great job, Anna. Here's to 100 more. Yes. I really want to challenge you to think about like staying creative, enjoying the process, experiment, connect to other folks, and don't try to do it alone. I think burnout and imposter syndrome. I have so much imposter syndrome, but it completely goes away when I continue creating and I'm like, oh, I really enjoy that. Like I could talk for an hour about podcasting, right? And you've helped me in the comments, but like it's really interesting that just the doing keeps the imposters away. And then when you, the listeners, interact with my content, interact with my show, it also reminds me that what I do is meaningful. And so make time to have those conversations. So Sean said, as a host and serial interviewer, your episode called Podcast Interviews 5 Key Elements Most Hosts Get Wrong was a great reminder and refresher for me. Oh, and episode 99 with Justin Moore. That episode was so good. Those two podcast episodes. And you know what? Podcast Interviews 5 Key Elements That Most Hosts Get Wrong was a follow up from an episode that I did that actually Sarah K. Heater from Podfox Media did. I did a podcast swap with her. So she had that show. I was like so overwhelmed. I was like, hey, who here wants to be featured on my feed? Send me an episode that you've done and I'll play it. And so those two episodes, even though they're like kind of almost like back to back, they've performed really, really well. And so I love that you were like, yeah, like that was a great reminder. When I was recording, I was like, Sarah's show was great, but like, what 5 things can I add? Right. Like, and it was like simple and no brainer. So when you're thinking about like, I'm not good enough, this is not good enough, is it? Or can you find that value that will help people grow their show? All right. So this is it. 1 minute left. So I guess this is it. I thank you to those of you, 9 of you that tuned in live for this 100th episode of the podcast space. Definitely hoping that I'm still here creating 100, 200, 300 more episodes. And I invite you to keep creating imperfect content, keep in your production journey. Even though you're not seeing the results right away, think about how this is nourishing your soul, how this is nourishing your network, your social media, how this is helping you live in your purpose. And so, Zach, thank you so much. Matt, Simona, who else was here? Elizabeth, Samantha, Conrad, Nick, all of you. That have been on watching live. Honestly, thank you so much for joining. And I will talk to you in the DMs. I did not plan a closing for the show. Ha, classic, right? But this is it. I'm going to stop the stream and I'm going to hop on hop on and breathe and chill, and I hope you have a great day and continue creating your imperfect content, but that will move you forward. All right, bye.